Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. I'm Luke and I do perfume reviews. If you like this type of content, please consider subscribing, give this video a like if you wish to, and leave me a comment down below. Today I've prepared a perfume history video for you. We are delving into the last 100 years of fragrance evolution, one decade at a time. Join me on this time travel journey as we explore general trends, iconic scents, as well as my personal favorites from each decade. Let's embark on this olfactory adventure, starting with the roaring 1920s. The 1920s was a time of significant social change, known as the Roaring Twenties or the Jazz Age, a liberating era filled with jazz music, wild parties, flapper girls, as well as economic growth, obviously. So as times changed, so did perfumes. Unlike the heavy florals of the past, perfumes in the 1920s became noticeably lighter and more complex. The first notable fragrance revolution happened in 2091 when Gabrielle Chanel released a scent that rejected all past norms of appropriate. As opposed to pure floral scents of the past, Chanel created something new and different. It looks like she wanted to create a perfume for the new woman, for the liberated woman, for the woman freed of tight clothes and tight social norms. And she asked the perfumer Ernest Beau to create a woman's perfume with a woman's scent. And so he did. He created Chanel No. 5. While Chanel No. 5 is not the first aldehyde perfume ever created, it was characterized by an overdose of fresh, soapy aldehydes, which Ernest Beau allegedly mistakenly added too much of. But Coco Chanel loved the final result and decided to keep the scent as it was. In terms of the bottle, Chanel opted for simplicity as opposed to fancy designs. It's also worth noting that Beau's first fragrance, Bouquet de Catherine, which he created for the house of Rallet, is said to be the predecessor of Chanel No. 5 because it was the first fragrance that included aldehydes in its composition. Despite the prevailing trend of fresh, clean and aldehydic florals, the 1920s witnessed the birth of the world's first modern oriental fragrance. In 1925, Guerlain introduced Shalimar, a citrusy, powdery, oriental vanilla fragrance inspired by a passionate love story between an emperor and an Indian princess. Shalimar is a perfume that I absolutely love and I plan to add it to my collection soon. Another 1920s fragrance that I have in my collection and that I have to mention is my grandmother's signature scent, the classic Tosca from 1921. This is a new version, but I also have one of her very old bottles that still smells amazing. So Tosca is a beautiful, powdery, citrusy fragrance that evolves into a floral and ambery scent. It's slightly aldehydic, but it's very potent. And even though this is an eau de cologne, it's classic, it's old school, it's beautiful. It's slightly similar to Chanel No. 5, but it's distinct in its own right. In my opinion, Tosca captures the spirit of the 1920s impeccably. Let's move on to the so-called dirty 30s. The 1930s was a very pessimistic and gloomy decade, characterized by the Great Depression that began in 1921 and the onset of the Second World War in 1939. Despite the need to be frugal, many people continued to indulge in the luxury of wearing a scent. The 1930s was a dark era for perfume as well. Apart from Old Spice, I don't have any prominent 1930s fragrances in my collection, but there were some interesting releases nonetheless. The two most popular genres were classic florals and orientals. For example, Worth released Je Reviens, a green floral scent. Jean Patou released Joy, a classic musky rose and jasmine fragrance. Elsa Schiaparelli released a fragrance called Shocking. And finally, Dana launched Tabu, a highly controversial scent said to be worn by prostitutes, but it left a lasting impact nonetheless. Tabu was a smouldering, rich, spicy, ambery oriental that became an instant success, influencing many more spicy ambery scents to come. The only scent from the 1930s that I own is the classic Old Spice. This is the aftershave version, not the classic cologne, but I absolutely love the scent. It smells almost exactly the same as the original. It's woody, aromatic, and slightly sweet. And I just find it very comforting. Sometimes I just put it on my hand and enjoy it. It smells almost the same as the classic cologne version, but this one is just a bit fresher, in my opinion. Let's move on to the 1940s, the Warring 40s. What I appreciate the most about vintage perfumes is their ability to capture the spirit of their time. The 1940s was a tumultuous era. The early 1940s were dominated by the Second World War, while the late 1940s were marked by the struggles of a war-torn world. However, it's often said that the hardest hardships inspired the most remarkable artistic creations. Despite the challenges of the Second World War, the perfume industry was flourishing in the late 1940s. I'll discuss 4 prominent perfumes from that era. In 1944, Robert Piguet introduced Bandit, an intense green leathery chypre created by Germaine Cellier. Bandit marked a complete departure from traditional women's perfumes, proving to be incredibly groundbreaking and influential, challenging conventional notions of femininity. In 1943, in the dystopian world of occupied, war-torn Paris, perfumer Edmond Rutinska created one of the most iconic fragrances of all time, called Femme de Rochas. Allegedly, to create Femme, he used an apricot-smelling chemical that he discovered in a chemical factory dump yard. He created a rich, fruity chypre scent, blending peach, plum, cinnamon, rose, and oak moss, symbolizing a return to traditional femininity and allure. The bottle is shaped like the curves of a woman's body. We also see this return to traditional femininity, extravagance, and luxury with Christian Dior. So in 1947, Dior introduced his own perfume that was meant to complement his new collection called The New Look. The New Look was criticized for featuring romantic, feminine, and corseted silhouettes, along with an excessive use of fabric. Miss Dior from 1947 is a green floral chypre. It's a very green and bitter scent that warms up on the skin and turns slightly floral and powdery, though the oak moss remains quite overwhelming to my nose. I like the original Miss Dior, but I'm not the biggest fan of it, even though it's still available today. And believe it or not, it was also a scent worn by my grandmother. Unfortunately, she didn't leave any bottles behind. Another fragrance introduced in the late 1940s is L'air du Temps by Nina Ricci, released in 1948. It's a delicate floral scent with a prominent note of carnation. The dove-shaped bottle symbolizes peace, optimism, and hope, which is the precise message this fragrance was intended to communicate. So this fragrance embodied the spirit of the post-war time. It was like a message of hope, like a breath of fresh air, because it was a departure from those heavy orientals and florals of the past. The 1950s was a decade of stability and normalcy, hence the nickname the Quiet Decade. But they're also known as the atomic age of science and technology. During this time, both women and men continued to wear classics from previous decades, such as Chanel No. 5 and Shalimar, alongside some iconic new releases. Up until the 50s, perfume was considered a luxury item, typically reserved for special occasions and rarely purchased by women for themselves. However, in 1953, Estée Lauder decided to change that mentality with the groundbreaking release of You've Dieu. She encouraged women to purchase the bath oil of You've Dieu and wear it as a daily perfume. The bath oil provided the perfect balance between luxury and practicality. It was technically not a perfume, so it allowed women to indulge without feeling guilty since it was affordable. Youth Dew quickly became an instant success. It's a vintage, spicy oriental scent with smouldering resins, balsams, spices, amber, and a myriad of other notes. It was an incredibly influential fragrance. Thanks to Youth Dew, perfume transformed into a daily accessory and a powerful means of self-expression. The perfume I'm showing you here is Cinnabar, which was originally released as Soft Youth Dew in the 70s. I also own a bottle of Youth Dew, but I can't find it anywhere. Some other popular genres from the 50s include fresh florals and aldehydic florals. In 1956, Christian Dior released Diorissimo, a fragrance capturing the delicate scent of Bouquet, lily of the valley. It exudes simplicity and freshness. It was created by the same perfumer as Rochas' Femme, Edmond Rudinska. Givenchy L'Interdit is another famous fragrance from the 1950s. Unfortunately, I don't have the original version since L'Interdit has long been discontinued, but this contemporary line of L'Interdit scents comes in bottles very similar to the original. The original L'Interdit was created exclusively for Audrey Hepburn, despite her wish for it to remain a forbidden, private scent. It was released to the public in 1957. It's a delicate floral aldehyde scent, very chic and elegant, much like its muse, Audrey Hepburn. The next decade is the swinging 60s. The 60s was a period of social upheaval and cultural revolution, marked by the prominence of the hippie movement and events like Woodstock. Iconic bands such as the Beatles and the Rolling Stones defined the era, making the 60s a loud and vibrant decade. The hippies famously wore patchouli oil. Interestingly, perfumes from the 60s adhered to classic compositions like soapy florals, aldehyde florals, chypres, and orientals. Notable fragrances from the era include Guerlain Chamade, 1969, Yves Saint Laurent I, 1964, Estée Lauder Azurée, 1969, and Dior Sauvage, 1966. Chamade and I are both chypre-style green florals, while Sauvage is an incredible men's classic that continues to be loved by many, even today. I only own one fragrance from the 60s. It's Cabochard from the French house of Gres. Although it was technically released in 1959, it was predominantly worn during the 60s. Cabochard is an intense, leathery chypre, similar to Estée Lauder's Azurée and Robert Piguet's Bandit. Cabochard translates to stubborn, and the fragrance really lives up to its name because it's a very strong scent with a bold personality. It's woody, mossy, earthy, ever so slightly sweet, slightly fresh, but primarily an unforgiving chypre, not for the faint-hearted. It's a strong, unforgiving chypre. Patience is key with this fragrance. If you give it time, it unveils its gorgeous side. The dry down smells like dry woods and dark chocolate, but it's still very smoky, very leathery, very mossy, very dry and bitter, and this is just not a scent for everyone. And while I do like this, I definitely cannot wear this on a daily basis. This is too strong even for me. You have to be a vintage lover in order to appreciate this. And even if you do appreciate it, you won't be able to wear this just, as a casual fragrance, because it's so strong, it's so unforgiving. And this is the 2019 version. I can't even imagine what the vintage formula must have been like, if even this reformulated formula smells very challenging to my nose. So that was Cabochard, and we have to move on to the 1970s. The 1970s was an eclectic decade with the enduring influence of the hippie movement. Both clothing and interior design embraced vibrant colours, particularly orange and yellow hues. When it comes to perfume, there was an explosion of different trends and styles, but most fragrances remained quite traditional. Earthy and oriental scents became popular again, likely due to the hippie movement. Yves Saint Laurent Opium and Estée Lauder Cinnabar, which I have here, repopularized the oriental trend. Patchouli also gained prominence. In 1970, Reminiscence introduced patchouli, a scent likely inspired by the hippie movement. It's a very strong, unforgiving, earthy, ambery patchouli scent that is not for the faint of heart. Soapy aldehydic florals were another trend, ranging from classics like Van Cleef & Arpels first to more avant-garde options like Estée Lauder White Linen, which I'm showing you here. Additionally, green florals, citrusy scents like Eau de Lancôme, and of course, all timeless classics from the previous decades continued to be worn. I won't be able to mention all 70s perfumes in this video, but I'll try to put the most important ones on the screen. In the late 70s, a promising Russian perfumer, Sofia Groisman, started and skyrocketed her career by creating white linen for Estée Lauder. I did do a video dedicated to her creations. I'll put the link on the screen. White linen is a big floral bouquet with hyacinths and carnations, enveloped in a lavish dose of vintage-style aldehydes, resting on a delicate, ambery woody base. White linen is fresh and clean, and it's a very heavy scent. White linen is the 1970s idea of freshness. Even today, it remains a powerhouse despite undergoing reformulation. The Orientals of the 1970s weren't drastically different from the classic Orientals from the 30s, 40s and 50s. In fact, Estée Lauder Cinnabar and Givenchy share many similarities. Even though Orientals underwent a slight modernization and were marketed as modern and attractive, they remained similar to classic Orientals from previous decades. The Orientals from the 70s were not overly sweet. The shift towards significantly sweeter fragrances didn't occur until the mid-1980s. Green and soapy florals were also all the rage in the 1970s. Cacharel introduced Anais Anais, which was marketed as an innocent, youthful fragrance. It's a daring, green lily scent with a subtly smoky, mossy base. My bottle is the newer formula, but I believe it has remained faithful to the original formulation. Another fragrance that really epitomizes the essence of the 70s is Rive Gauche from Yves Saint Laurent. Much like Estée Lauder's Givenchy, it strove to move away from traditional societal norms regarding women's fragrances. Rive Gauche was marketed as a scent for unobtrusive, independent women who purchased perfume for themselves. The fragrance is housed in a practical aluminium can. However, the scent is still very classic. It's a powdery, soapy floral with a subtle metallic undertone. I've tried it multiple times and I do find it truly appealing, especially when it dries down. It's a very dry, powdery, metallic scent, a little old-fashioned, but I believe it's still beautiful today. So that's everything for the first part of this video. It's already quite long, so I think I'll just split it into two parts. Part 1, which you've just watched, covers the period from the 1920s to the 1970s, while the second part will focus on the 1980s through the 2010s. So thank you so much for watching. If you've made it this far, let me know in the comments what fragrances from these decades you own and love. I hope to see you in part 2, which will be up on my channel in a couple of days. Have a nice day. Bye.